As the CH-47 lifted off the ground, Billy Chance's alter ego, J.K., conscientiously concentrated on trying to become unconscious, so his mind once again sought to go on permanent vacation to places like Smithfield. Smithfield, Illinois was actually Smithfield, Illinois, but seeing as how the Smithfield all-powerful Rotary Club was too miserly to hire a real sign painter for $85, Henry Jenkins, their treasurer, did the job and half the price, so the welcome sign at the end of Sherman Street just off the slip road of Route 79 cost the town fathers $125,276.96 in reprinted tourist brochures, ball caps, and school book covers, not to mention the relettering of the police car and the fire truck, which were still owned by Moriarty Savings and Loan. Ralph Jenkins' lawsuit over the repainting of his hardware store sign and delivery van was still pending. Incorporating late by Midwestern standards, the Smithfield citizenry experienced World Wars I and II, the post-war booms, the Cold War, the Korean War, the labor wars of the 20s and 30s, the ongoing race wars, the inception of the war on drugs, and William Shatner's war on believable acting. For half the population of the hamlet and surrounding area, things made pretty good sense and were as they should be. Folks got up, went to work, came home to their loved ones, and got paid every Friday at 5 o'clock so they could repay all the money they had spent last week. For the other half, those under 30, a one-armed blind man in a dark room trying to shove a pound of hot melted butter up a wildcat's ass had a better chance of trying to make sense of what was going on in the U.S. at the time. Both hoped and prayed for a better life somewhere down the road. From the perspective of the good people of Smithfield, or even from the perspective of the farmer in Jesus Christ, it's fucking cold North Dakota for that matter, the winter of '72 was memorable. It was a harsh winter. The weather was terrible, crop yields were low, and the curse of the eighth plague, disco, was upon them. At the same time, of course, were the citizens fighting the war, trying like hell not to come home from Viet Nam in a sandwich bag, was even more memorable. The thing was that in August of '72, in order for Tricky Dick to get himself reelected, he told the world the war was over. What he neglected to mention was the fighting was going to go take another 3 years. The 11th was the official day all the ground troops were going home. People stateside cheered, Tricky reckoned he was on the government teat for another 4 years, and Uncle Ho lifted a glass of rice wine. Meanwhile, the flyboys on the Philippine Islands geared up their B-52s to launch the largest Operation Arclight Charles had ever seen. In case you've never heard of Arclight, let me put it in perspective for you. Drop 3 hits of purple microdot, wait an hour or so, and then go skydiving naked while shagging Miss January from behind on the way down, and don't pop your chute until you're about 300 feet off the ground so you can get the most out of the ground rush. That's probably the rough equivalent of what it feels like when a full squadron of B-52 Stratofortresses drop their shit on you non-stop for 24 hours. Only not as much fun. Curtis J. bombed them back into the Stone Age LeMay, christened it carpet bombing. What a lovely way to redecorate. Reputedly, Curtis never said that, but far be it from Walter and the good old boys club over at CBS, ABC, and NBC to miss an opportunity to boost viewership and pay homage to William Randolph Hearst and the long-standing tradition of journalistic propaganda. 3 cheers for yellow journalism. In 1970, Tricky Dick et al. Declared the end of the war was in sight. The Moon, the Sun, and Alpha Centauri were also in sight. In 1971, Cronkite declared the war was all but unwinnable, which to the vast majority of the American public made it so. In 1972, Tricky et al. Declared the war was over. For the first time. The boys on the front lines getting their asses shot off had other opinions about the state of the war. Police action. Meanwhile, on the southernmost border of Merriam County, just across the state line from Lincoln County, next door to Smithfield, lies Patriot, Illinois. About 15 minutes just outside of town, there was a small trailer park, which had thrice been wiped out by tornadoes. Slow learners that they were, the residents kept rebuilding their solid plywood, aluminum, and glass dwellings, never realizing the storms were probably God's way of saying, "Get that shit off my earth." Herein, on lot number 127 of the You Need a Rest trailer park, resided the Derber family. Chester Derber, aged 18 years, was feeling very proud that afternoon as he prepared the barbecue for his parents' 17th wedding anniversary, which was scheduled to begin promptly somewhere between 3 and 6 that evening. The exact time couldn't be set because there was no reliable way to know when Cletus Derber would come home from the Veterans of Foreign Wars, post number 339, where he shared a few beers and a Jack Daniels or two, at least 4 times a week with the war buddies he never served with. Although they had to wait for Zelda Derber, alias the wife, to close up and get off work from Beautician Magician's Beauty and Tanning Salon over on Pershing Avenue. The guest list was fairly comprehensive, so all 9 of their friends had been invited. 10 counting Mario Ippolito Sanchez, the 16-year-old muscular Hispanic delivery boy from the ShopRite supermarket, which Cletus still couldn't figure out why his wife was so insistent on inviting. He reasoned that maybe it was because Mario was so obliging when it came to delivering even the smallest grocery orders. Like the time Sanchez had taken the time to pedal his 10-speed bike all the way out to the trailer park at 11 in the morning just to make sure Zelda got what she needed, a single pack of cool-filtered cigarettes. Like a judge who had just successfully manipulated a trial, young Chester was pumped full of pride that day. The source of young Chester's newfound pride was his Selective Service Registration Document, SA Form 80, draft card, which had arrived in the afternoon mail, thus giving official certification to his manhood. Monday morning, Chester Derber, man, would dutifully register at the Hall of Records over at the county seat, which was really just a post office, which was just a small room in the back of J.D.'s Feed and Grain Emporium. That afternoon, about an hour before the party, Chester had his masculinity tucked neatly in the top of his pocket of his baby blue Dacron Hanes dress shirt with the button-down collar when it happened. While reaching across the barbecue for some more Fast Light briquettes, the SA Form 80 draft card made a break for it and gently floated down, coming to rest on the glowing coals. In the blink of a Walter Cronkite CBS eye, Chester was no longer a dutiful, loyal patriot, but a dangerous, treasonous felon who no doubt was a commie terrorist sympathizer, or worse yet, a socialist, facing 7 to 10 years in the federal pen and/or a $20,000 fine, the standard penalty for burning a draft card agreed upon by the enlightened honorable gentlemen of the United States Congress, alias the Boys on the Hill. On entering the gravel-strewn, weed-infested yard later that afternoon, Mrs. Derber saw that her son was so distraught that she was compelled to cancel the party. Mustering further concern for her son's disrupted emotional state, over the next week, the now unnerved mother took to seeking advice and counsel from everyone, including Phil the Man-Man. Oh yeah, and Mario Ippolito Sanchez too, sometimes twice a day. That afternoon, Phil the Mailman was besides himself when he spread the word down at the CPD and SC, that is Central Postal Distribution and Sorting Center to normal civilians, over on Washington and Lincoln Streets, which coincidentally overlapped into Lincoln County, home of Smithfield, whose town council had just last week passed a town ordinance against trailer parks. The reasoning for the ordinance was anyone not able to afford proper housing had no business in Smithfield. Like all those little yellow bastards coming over here from Viet Nam looking to the good and loyal, God-fearing citizens of the USA to take them in after they went and messed up their own country. Not coincidentally, 7/8 of the Smithfield Town Council, as well as the mayor, were active members of the all-powerful Rotary Club. So, in his honor, Henry Jenkins heard from his mailman that the kids over in Marion County were burning their draft cards. He nearly took a heart attack thinking about the impending rioting in the streets and the inevitable occupation of his fair city by the National Guard troops, who could no doubt be called in by morning to restore peace and make sure all the black kids could still get onto their own buses and over to their own schools on their own side of town. "We don't want no Kent State, goddammit," he dutifully informed a hurriedly assembled town council. Meanwhile, Doris Hunsinger, sitting comfortably under the purple plastic bullet-shaped hairdryer, which made her look like Robbie the Robot from Lost in Space, had just begun drying her new beehive bouffant when she was startled by Arthur Crowley, president of the APRC, as he burst through the front door of Mary's Hurley's Curl Up and Die on North Patton Street. Aside from being the personal secretary to the mayor, the Elks, the Lodge, the Moose, and the Royal Order of the Rainbow Trout, Doris was also the executive secretary of the all-powerful Rotary Club. Doris, come quick. We need you over to the courthouse. There's an emergency meeting of the Rotary Club." "What? Why?" Doris inquired, lifting Robbie the Robot's parasitic shell from her own. "There's an emergency meeting right away about the rioting going on over in Marion County." "Rioting? What rioting?" The other bouffants became nervous, dropped their Home and Garden magazines, Montgomery Ward's, and Sears and Roebuck's catalogs, and snapped to attention. "The rioting that's going on because of the draft card burning." "Oh, my Heavenly Father in heaven." Doris rarely resorted to profanity, but was very upset at this news, and she gathered her things together. "I told Pete it was only a matter of time till it reached here, but he didn't want to sell the house and move over to Smithfield. Maybe now he'll listen to reason." As Doris removed her plastic bib apron and gathered up her genuine imitation Gucci bag, all the other patients at the beauty shop wasted no time disengaging themselves from their purple, orange, and lime green plastic space helmets before dashing through the front door, still being held open by Arthur Crowley, and headed out to the ShopRite grocery store to stock up on emergency supplies of Twizzlers, tampons, and Twinkies, After all, once it started, there was no telling how long the siege might last. All the others in the salon, except that is the part-time beauty student Linda Davis, who knew a girl that once dated a guy who used to hang around with a friend of Chester Derber's, and therefore was of the opinion that most guys in Marin County didn't have the balls to burn a joint, much less a draft card. Linda just calmly sat behind the reception desk, hand on chin, shaking her head and thumbing through last year's Cosmopolitan magazine. Again. Fucking morons, Linda mumbled to the empty beauty parlor. The last 2 minutes on board Titanic must have seemed uneventful when compared to the melee that passed for the emergency meeting of the APRC that day. Robert's Rules of Orders never saw the light. The end result of the gathering of the APRC was a barrage of ordinances, legally binding articles, and laws forbidding the burning, mutilating, tearing, defacing, altering in any way, shape, or form, to include, as in an improvised toothpick, the United States issue Selective Service Document SA-80 draft card within the city limits of Smithfield, Illinois. Council members were gathered at the town council chambers around the 30-seat French polished mahogany table, proceeding with the speed of molasses going uphill at the wintertime as the meeting continued. What about covering it in plastic so it don't get damaged? Council member at the end of the table on the other side of the room queried. That's a good point, Frank. Doris, draft an exemption clause. Yes, sir. Gentlemen, other suggestions for exemptions? That's a good point, George. Doris, add in the event of losure to the exemption clause. Yes, sir. How about if it gets stolen? Good point, Frank. Good point. Doris, stealing clause, got it. What if it gets accidentally burnt? As one, the entire table stopped and stared at Horace Johnson. That's ridiculous. How can a man's draft card get accidentally burnt? Henry Watkins challenged. I don't know. Maybe somebody could be leaning over a campfire or something and bang, it gets knocked into the fire. Never happen. Any other realistic ideas? Along with the fact that the town's name was spelt wrong on the APRC's ordinances and the fact that it was already a federal offense to burn or alter the Selective Service Document SA-80 draft card, and so superseded and nullified anything the Smithfield APRC had to say about it, never occurred to any of the stalwart, middle-aged, jaded gentlemen of the local bureaucracy.